Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat as we start next session. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting next session now. You are kindly requested to take your seat now. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. The session with His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal of Jordan is about to start.
So good morning and welcome to our debate or session with our guest today is His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal, member of the royal family of Jordan and a leading figure in the political and cultural sphere of Jordan, and I would say the whole Middle East, a man who has dedicated much of his life to intercultural and interfaith dialogue, and so has come to represent a really important figure, as I would say, in this important area of the world that we are talking about today in this Med Forum. With me, I'm Riccardo Chartreux, I'm a journalist from Italian television, and I have worked a lot in that area, and I have a passion and a very strong affection for that area, for the peoples of the Middle East. But with me there is Mrs. Maria Fantapié, who is a scholar, a student, a researcher with the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. That is a Geneva-based private diplomacy organization, and as a deep expert of in particular of Jordan, where she had lived and worked, and in general of the Middle East. So I would like her to start with the first question for our guest. Please, Maria.
Thank you, Riccardo. Welcome, everyone. Your Royal Highness, Jordan is part of the Levant region, and we know that the Levant region, it's an area where societies are highly interconnected. However, unfortunately, in the past decades, we have seen that conflicts, climate change, and external interference have driven apart these connections. Is there hope to start a new process of integration of the Levant, and what is needed for this?
I'd just like to point out, ladies and gentlemen, that in the 70s, when we signed the Mashriq Agreement, Mashriq corresponds to Levant. Descartes once said, if everything in the world is west, where does the sun rise? So al-Mashriq haythu tushriq al-shams is worth bearing in mind. We signed as Syria, Egypt, and Jordan. This was the appellation that we were given by the European Union at the time, because this corresponded to Maghreb, the land of the setting sun. And in the context from then until today, each individual country has been visited by European Union members, delegations, bilaterally. So they go back to Brussels and they talk about the tariffs on Jordanian tomatoes, the tariffs on Egyptian potatoes, and of course the Syrian dimension I don't want to comment on because the situation in Syria resulting in a drought in a country which was a major producer of food also resulted in the consequence of instability that we have seen for some time. So I'm asking myself, between Israel on the one side and the Gulf states on the other, does the cooperation in the region mean jumping over the Levant? The Levant, to remind you, is 71 million people. Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon. If, of course, Israel would make up its mind about which part of the world it belongs to, then maybe we could invite this inclusive thinking. But at the moment, the level of hatred is toxic in our region. And I visited the Balkans. I brought Bosnian Muslim families out of the Balkans. I never thought that it would come to our region the way it has. And our region should be known by its development abilities, by its creative thinking, by its cultural contribution, and more of that later. But I would say that the concept of Middle East, our American friends talk about from Marrakesh to Bangladesh. I think that is a little bit of a vast map, which we really cannot recognize today, because what are the complementaries between the peripheries, South Asia in terms of manpower, and the Gulf? What is the complementarities between Europe and our manpower? Our migrants are going to Europe. The Palestinians are victims of victims, as Edward Said once would say. And nobody wants to attend to Palestine because of the priorities of Ukraine or whatever else, or the changes in government of Israel. So these issues are creating gaping, yawning gaps in our region, which is not looked at as a region. We would like to feel that those 71 million Arabs, why do the Poles, the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Slovakians have, with 71 million people, all the investment that they could possibly imagine? Why do some countries have a per capita income of $100,000? And we in our region, despite our best efforts, and I have never been a representative of a rich country in terms of resources, but I am a representative of a rich country in terms of the quality of human beings. And this is why we created in the ILO in the 1970s a call for the creation of an international labor compensatory facility. When are we going to be looked at as Anthropocene and not just the peripheries of matter, economic and financial dealings?
Your Highness, just let me go stay on this topic, because you mentioned Israel and the Palestinians, and I think Jordan has a very important role as the custodian of the holy sites of Jerusalem. And when you mentioned, you mentioned a central issue in the life of the region, and I think today in the public debate in the West, especially in Europe, the central issue of the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians, the future of that area, and the role of Jerusalem, the future of Jerusalem, is quite often overlooked, almost as if it was something that we know we cannot solve. There is no solution, so let's just, ignore it. But I think you cannot ignore the issue of Israel, Palestinians, and Jerusalem, and try and solve the problems of the Middle East. That is the focus. That is the main problem. And until you don't solve that, and even Arab countries are divided on this, because that different Arab countries have different relationship now with Israel. Do you think that this issue is being forgotten by the West and by the partners of the Middle East? And do you think that even that the peoples of the region are thinking, okay, there is no solution, let's try to live with this? Or is there maybe a way forward that can be taken?
I personally believe in facts, and the facts are why I wrote books on Jerusalem, on Palestinian self-determination, on settlements, which we used to call settlement colonies, مستعمرات وليست مستوطنات. In the context, I just want to say, of Greater Jerusalem today, I have heard that representatives of the Israeli Foreign Office would not like to talk about Jerusalem because it is off the table. Years ago, I asked Turgut Özal, who was president of Turkey, I said, why did you support the coalition? He said to me, Prince, history has told us that if there is war, it is better to be at the peace conference rather than to be on the menu. So there are many of us who are at peace conferences all over the world with think tanks who like to bring in Israelis or Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims or whatever. But do they get anything to eat at that peace conference? Oslo has clearly been torn to bits because the area most sensitive in the Oslo agreements was the Greater Jerusalem region, stretching from Sheikh Jarrah in the north to Silwan in the south, is now off the table. So if this is the case, annexation by sheer dint of lobbying and willpower on the part of the Israelis who regard, and I'm talking about the radical Israelis, of course, who regard the spatial acquisition of Jerusalem as a dream come true, then I'd just like to refer you to a website, Terrestrial Jerusalem, Al-Quds Ad-Dunyawiyya, which I think you might find interesting. I think it started in 2018 or 2019, and it takes into consideration what I call the landscape of Jerusalem, not the emotionscape of Jerusalem. Because if you take the Israel Ministry of Tourism map, there is no reference to Muslim sites in Jerusalem. I think one mosque is mentioned. Whereas the terrestrial Jerusalem map is a Tres Culturas map, which includes Jewish sites, Christian sites, and Muslim sites. And I want to say in Rome, that having the third-party involvement of Christians, and particularly Christian Arabs, is so important to making a balance between the people of Jerusalem. And the people of Jerusalem are an entity in themselves and have been so for centuries. So in terms of cultural Jerusalem, we have the Takaya, Zawaya, Al-Awqaf, the foundations, the educational centers of learning. My professor at Oxford, who I still visit, who is in his 90s now, said to me the last time I came in, they're bombing libraries in Gaza. They're bombing libraries elsewhere. We, as university professors, have gathered $1 million to reinvest in the libraries. So we have seen in the occupied territories ecocide, ecosphere, ecocide, as in suicide. We have seen the development of sociocide. And my question is, are we going to stand back and stop thinking about Jerusalem simply because it's not on the table? I really hope, and I remember Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin from Lebanon on one occasion, we said, let's create a Jerusalem, Al-Quds fi al-Damir, Jerusalem consciousness project, which will have everything to do with bringing the people of the book, the monotheists, closer to each other culturally, apart from anything else. I really think that interfaith dialogue is something that we mouth. But my experience over 40 years has been, it goes through 3 phases of fear. Fear of the other, fear of the folks back home, التطبيع والتهم والآخري, accusations of normalization, which is a contradiction in terms, because if you're normalizing normally, you make peace with an enemy, you don't make peace with a friend. And thirdly, a sort of agoraphobia, fear of open spaces. Like I should have had butterflies when I came onto the stage, because what am I going to say? I've got to the point in life where I don't really care too much about what I say, because I have to make the point. There is justice and there is injustice, and the two cannot live together. So if the colonies, settlement colonies, are front-ending further expansion, excuses like the littoral of Israel, like the littoral of the Egyptian Delta, being affected by the encroaching Mediterranean Sea. As you know, the sea is rising and the Delta is affected. And this is a pretext for further expansion. Oh, you've got a lot of desert in Jordan. Why can't we have some of your desert to develop our solar power, for example? Well, why can't I have some of your expansion to develop a Palestinian sense of dignity and self-worth? And that's why I would like to say to you, please take into consideration الانهدام الإفريقي العظيم. The Great Rift Valley stretches from Madagascar all the way to Turkey. So you have tectonic plates, European, Asian, African, that could be a project for all of us. Like the Danube Commission, we need a Rift Valley Commission, which would be a new start for you, the Europeans, who are looking for foreign policy initiatives, as I appreciate, not in projects, but in a concept of bringing stability to a region where for too long we have been fragmented and balkanized. By the way, I'd just like to say that in terms of Ukraine and Russia, it was Halford Mackinder, the founder of the term geopolitics in 1900, who spoke about the world island, the Baltic to the Adriatic, the Baltic to the Black Sea. Now, if Asia and Europe are separated geopolitically by these mighty rivers, well, isn't it true also that we are separated by a valley that runs through all our countries? It's not uniquely an Israeli-Palestinian reality, although the Palestinians have suffered immensely, but it is also Lebanese, Syrian, Turkish, Iraqi, Jordanian, and much more. So I just want to say that things being taken off the map sporadically, like we don't talk about Somalia anymore, we don't talk about Yemen anymore, we don't talk about human dignity anymore. For God's sake, well, what is foreign policy about? For me, foreign policy is about the Anthropocene and not about the globalization of matter. So culture, I think, ranks very highly in our thoughts, especially in Rome, where we are today.
Thank you. And we see mounting challenges. And as we heard this morning, and as you rightly pointed out, we can face these challenges only if there is regional integrations, especially in the Levant. And one of the issues that you have mentioned is the issue of droughts and water scarcity. Now, water scarcity has been a driver and a multiplier of conflict in the Levant. Is there an opportunity or a way to make water a driver for cooperation, if there is possibility actually for all the countries of the Levant to talk about how to manage their water resources?
I think that in terms of the European Union, it started with coal and steel. In the Levant, neighboring as we do the Mediterranean on the one side with the new finds of oil and gas proliferating, neighboring the oil finds in the Gulf, whether from 1900 to the Second World War, and the importance of this region. Why is it that this oil cannot be used in developing a regional concept like coal and steel of water and energy? So integration can then flow from the identification of oil and steel in Europe through policies that brought together the Club of Rome, or forgive me, I was president of the Club of Rome, that's something else, a cultural club, but brought together the Rome Declaration. Why can't it be, hopefully, something that can bring together a Levant declaration that we are interested, we the peoples are interested from a bottom-up approach, if I may, to developing a united peoples of the Levant. Hopefully one day a united peoples in New York, not the United Nations, but something that recognizes the fact that politicians are fractious for obvious reasons. Peoples will rarely turn their back on peoples. Look at the good football games now in Qatar. And the second thing that I would emphasize is that security is about human dignity. So there is فهرس الحرمان المتعدد, the multi-deprivation index, which we have to look at. Somebody says he's poor or she's poor. I have no doubt that she's expressing herself, but is it poverty in education? Is it poverty in health? Is it poverty in job opportunities? Is it poverty in climate change? Our region is going to be one of the hottest regions in the world in a matter of years. We are burning as a region. We sent a technical paper to the Sharm el-Sheikh conference from the Aqaba meeting, which we held with scientists. And it is the science diplomacy that is also requiring harnessing not only the development diplomacy, which follows projects to make the rich richer, but concepts that make regions more effective.
Your Highness, let me just come back to the issue of the Levant, and you mentioned there's 71 million people living in this region, but we can't overlook the fact that Jordan is a beacon of stability in the Levant, whereas if we look at the countries of the region, Lebanon is in a deep social and economic crisis. Iraq is a country fractured along sectarian, tribal, political fault lines. What can we say about Syria? A civil war now less harsh than it was before, but it's 11 years and it's not finished, and it's not, it's a crisis, it's not solved. So the whole area is in turmoil. And what I'm also wondering is the role of the young people, because, you know, since the Arab Spring, 11 years have passed. People who were children at the time are now adults, are now young adults. And I see some protests in this, I have seen some protests in Lebanon, I've seen some protests in Iraq. We've seen millions of people leaving Syria and other millions coming back. What do you think about the young people in the region? Do you think that something new is brewing among young people in that region that maybe will make us see everything that has happened since 2011, or something like an era that has passed? Maybe there's something new that we still don't see, as we didn't see Arab Spring coming. You know, just one day before the Tunisian revolution, the embassies were sending cables, everything is fine here, everything is quiet, and it wasn't. So what do you think it will happen?
I think taking full advantage of the technological revolutions and advances, we have to think of bridging the digital divide. And I don't call having a mobile telephone in every hand in the street, young and old, bridging the technological divide. What I would like to focus on is those call centers, for example. Imagine the NGO call centers, the UNGO call centers, which contact people who have come destitute from Syria. Within years, they are now managing their own ATM cards. They are becoming aware of the policy issues that concern them. For example, water catchment. They fulfill every aspect of what you Europeans call algorithmic waiting. Why can't they do that before leaving our part of the world, so that we know what the real wealth of our manpower is, and we don't offer it free and gratis to other countries to take layers of our manpower and append them to the economic development of countries that need new, fresh blood in terms of the industrial world. So I think that in terms of the new development, we have to recognize that the longest distance in the world is from here to here, yes, but then it's back from here to there. We have too much emphasis in our part of the world on emotions, which are clear every single day. Somebody is swearing at somebody else through social media. Is social media only for the indecent exposure? Or is it also for the promotion of an empirical, experiential, evidence-based population of young people who would be dealing with evidence-based initiatives in the so-called West? Why can't they deal with it in our part of the world? Why can they not be empowered with making a simulacrum of an ECOSOC in our region, Economic and Social Council, where young people meet every day of every week of every quarter, present the priorities of the region from the region to New York or Bretton Woods, World Bank, etc., IMF, and then feel that they have attended to a regional agenda. Let us make them stakeholders in deciding their own future. But simply holding meetings upon meetings of young people and women and so forth, it's wonderful. I've done it all my life, I suppose, but it hasn't got them anywhere. And I'm not important. We are not all important. It's the millions of people out there who want to receive a message of hope from a meeting like this who are important.
Thank you. I wanted to refer with the last question, maybe, if there is still a couple of minutes, because you referred back in the first answer about like there is a general sense of a shifting attention away from the Levant, especially from Europe and from the US. But if this Levant region is going to be still a region where conflict, unfortunately, is thriving, is this posing a strategic threat to Europe, in your opinion?
Definitely. I think that the idea of Iran, Afghanistan before it, Iran, and the Near East region acting as a throughput to the Silk routes, whether the terrestrial Silk route or the maritime Silk route, is extremely important to an Asian-European dialogue. And that's why I referred to the Asian-European geopolitics that are separating Asia from Europe. That's why I presume they meet in Bali and the President of the United States meets with the President of the People's Republic of China. Now, we can take different attitudes and say, well, one is good for supply of weapons and another is good for the military support or the support for our safety and well-being. But if we want to move out of patronage and say that we as a region have something to credit us with, why can't we be credited at least with opting for what I would call positive neutrality? No, people are asking about non-alignment. There is no non-alignment in the world today that we can revive unless there is at least an understanding of positive neutrality. Those football games, when the referee says that, to me the framework is positive neutrality. Because yes, the Iranians played football with the Americans. Now, is that a limited satisfaction that the two teams get? Or is there some satisfaction for us? When they're young people, they were young people. Isn't there some hope that the rippling effect of all this tokenism might one day influence the creation of institutional altruism, institutional effective altruism? Zakat is all about institutions acting altruistically towards those who could be empowered. Zakat now funds a half of the budget of the HCR. We have 51 million refugees in our region. And we always go to Washington and say, can you give more support to refugees? If we can produce a very clear, with the integrity that it deserves, well-run institution that everybody recognizes, and by the way, Muslim zakat is not just for Muslims. It is Muslim zakat for all those who are suffering in the world. If you have a child coming in with cancer or with some awful disease, you don't say, is this child Christian or Muslim before you treat him or her. So isn't it time that the image of Muslims changed from blood-sucking extremists as we are painted? On the other hand, what can you do? I mean, the other day I saw an American evangelist and he said, all we evangelists, not me of course, but all we evangelists hate Arabs and Muslims. That was the opening remark. So I said, well, and good morning to you too. So where do we get with that? I mean, it's not my fault that you were living in the United States for 3 generations and had no idea that Christianity came in these few weeks of before Christmas, actually came from my part of the world. And when you say Arabs, how many Christians do you hate? And why is it that the relationship with Jews was the way it was before the Second World War? And now they are, of course, have evolved. So I'm just wondering, who is pressuring whom to be extreme? Is it the American influence over the Jews of the world? No, because today, even if you look at Haaretz, Jews in the United States are not so popular with Jews in Israel. So the proxy role of different countries is often addressed by many writers, but the fact is that you have to look very closely to recognize who they are, and that is a waste of time. So why don't we focus on developing our own regional approaches? I just tell you one anecdote. The president of the University of Tel Aviv came to visit me some time ago, and he said, thank you very much for what you did for us in the 11th century. In the 11th century. I don't know, I was around in the 11th century, but that's how it was. So I said, thank you very much for your vote of confidence, but I want to know now that you owe me. He was talking about the translation of the classics, so I had single-handed translated the Greek classics and the Latin classics. I said, now that you owe me, may I ask you, what intellectual generosity are you showing us in return? And the same could be asked today of many countries in the region. Instead of saying, no, I don't like you, I won't talk to you, I'm right, you're wrong, why don't we develop, once again, the art of dialogue, the noble art of conversation, not of conversion, mind you, but of conversation in the interest of the public good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Highness. And actually, the idea of dialogue and understanding is about the whole thing. The forum is about. Thank you for your thoughts and reflections. We all thank His Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal and Ms. Maria Fantapia, who's with us, and we end our debate here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as next station starts right after. Thank you.